There are two broad categories of gamers that will find their way to Armored Core 6: Fires of Rubicon. The first consists of those fans of the franchise. They are surprisingly legion and rapidly enthusiastic, who have been waiting a decade for the developer to return to the series. The other, and much larger group of gamers, are those who have become ensnared by the magic of FromSoftware via Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and especially Elden Ring. The question is whether Armored Core 6 can serve both groups equally well. Unsurprisingly, the answer is yes, but it's a nuanced yes. FromSoftware is at the top of their already stellar game, and Armored Core 6 is a brilliant and evolutionary return to the beloved series. It's also as welcoming as it can be to newcomers. Still, AC6 might not be a game for the masses. Possibly aside from Elden Ring's beginner-friendly elements, FromSoftware games have always had a steep price of entry, happy to exchange some blood, sweat, and tears for the unmatched feeling of beating a boss, or even just making progress. Armored Core 6 is no different. Get ready to read or hear this in every review. Armored Core 6 is not Dark Souls with mechs. It's obvious, but it's also important. The game's combat mechanics are fine-tuned to an almost astonishing degree. The environments and enemies are often spectacular, but it isn't a game filled with mysterious men and women, Lovecraftian monsters, or incremental increases in power. Where Armored Core 6 most reflects the developer's consistent philosophy is in the tension between perseverance, skill, and ultimate reward. It's the core of AC6, as it is in every recent FromSoftware title. There are many Dark Souls fans who have forgotten or never knew that FromSoftware largely made a name for itself with the Armored Core franchise. What's fascinating is that some of the early Armored Core design philosophies made their way into Dark Souls, and now 10 years of refining Souls-related games have allowed FromSoftware to create the best game, by far, in the Armored Core franchise. In other words, AC6 is not Dark Souls with mechs, but AC6 would not exist in its present form without Dark Souls. Armored Core 6: The Fires of Rubicon is a mech fighting game. Instead of slow and lumbering mechs, this is a world of agile, powerful, and infinitely customizable machines. Combat is aggressive, often chaotic, and always tactical. If it feels like under all the steel and pistons, two nimble ninjas are fighting, it could be because the director was responsible for Sekiro. You play as a nameless mercenary, C4621, a human who has been surgically augmented to control a mech and a range of interchangeable parts. You have been sent to the planet Rubicon 3 to fight for various conflicting corporations and factions. Primarily, these are Ballum Industries, Arquebus Corporation, and their subsidiaries. A mysterious and powerful resource called Coral is at the heart of the conflict. Coral is powerful enough to ignite an entire planetary system, so stakes are high. There are other factions like the Rubicon Liberation Front with the goal of undermining the corporation's mining of Coral. Players uncomfortable with moral ambiguity in their narratives might squirm a bit with AC6's story. Your character is willing to fight for anyone who pays, and to happily switch allegiances as needed. There are no good guys and bad guys. You and your fellow mercs are both and neither. Told almost entirely via radio headset communications, the story certainly escalates in drama and complexity. The stakes get higher as the conflict grows more nuanced. However, while it becomes more engaging, the jargon-filled narrative is probably overall the least successful element of Armored Core 6, though it's entirely consistent with the setting and theme. Players may find themselves skipping through a lot of it, but then FromSoftware games always have essentially optional stories. The story is worth exploring, but the game's action is the focus. Combat in Armored Core 6 is, to use a highly technical term, crazy good. This level of perfection comes from a combination of two elements: the implementation of the customizable mechs and their relationship to level design, pacing, and enemy encounters. The developers state that AC6 is built on a gameplay loop of two equal parts. The first is assembling and upgrading your mech. The second is throwing your design into combat, failing, and then returning to the garage, lessons learned. You're not expected to be immediately successful, but to hit wall after wall until you figure out the solution. And like in every FromSoftware game, the tools are there to help you succeed. Success in combat comes down to changing your mech to fight the circumstances. To this end, the game gives you an insane amount of control over every part of your mech. Not just the weapons, but the head, arms, legs, torsos, power supply, and circuit boards under the hood. Between all the options for changing gear and cosmetics, AC6 provides an unheard of level of customization. While AC's jargon might be different, experienced role-playing gamers will still find equivalent stats for stamina, strength, hit points, and damage. While it has a deep system for customization with endless ways of swapping builds, the base concepts are not hard to understand. And as in most RPGs, changing gear is a series of balanced trade-offs. Agility is at the cost of power or defense. Strength is at the cost of nimble movement. Because mechs in AC6 move in 360 degrees, the ability to fly or hover is often as important as speed on the ground. Reverse jointed legs work great for scaling walls and staying in the air a little longer. Tetrapod legs can hover. Tank legs provide a massive defense boost, though increase encumbrance when lifting off. Every exchangeable part has important advantages in some situations and becomes a liability in others. Parts are bought and sold in the shop, and they're unlocked by completing missions or paid for by coin earned in combat. Additionally, there is a mechanic called OS tuning, which unlocks character upgrades like faster reloading, a powerful kick, and many more. These are paid for by OST chips, earned in the game's PvP or PvE arena. Parts are bought and sold for the same price, so there's no cost penalty for trying new gear. At some point, players need to exit the garage and move on to a mission. Armored Core 6 is not an open world, but strictly mission-based. Some of the missions are very short, and others, like the massive Titan-like mining rig encounter in the first chapter, are essentially multi-stage boss battles in disguise. All are repeatable for a higher rating and extra coin. Dying means restarting a level, or optionally, starting at a checkpoint, taking a small hit on your earnings. There are no leftover piles of souls to retrieve. On the other hand, you only have 3 repair kits, and checkpoints are widely spaced. In a nod to player sanity, a supply drop usually replenishes ammo and healing before a boss. If you've played other FromSoftware games, you've experienced the mechanic of a seemingly unsurmountable mini-boss in one level showing up again in the next as a lower level enemy. Nearly every mission in AC6 is based on a specific type of new enemy mech, machine, or defense for which you're usually unprepared. While talented players might be able to brute force their way through, most mortals are expected to fail, return to the garage, and try again with a different assembly. The game's epically challenging boss battles are no different, except they add the need for infinitely more pattern recognition, precision, and tactical awareness. The loop of build, try, fail is at the heart of Armored Core 6. Everything else is ornamentation. If you don't connect with the core loop, AC6 won't be a good time. Because Armored Core 6 is a cross-gen title, it, like Elden Ring, trades some current-gen graphical sheen for great art direction that doesn't rely on pure power. It's awash in earth and metallic tones, and generally set in industrial landscapes, but there are some jaw-dropping vistas too. The action is so frenetic and full of color that you probably won't notice that some textures are pretty simple. There were a few places where I was surprised by both a reminder of scale. The mechs seem nimble and diminutive, but they actually tower over cars and freight. and by the lack of detail in the set dressing. The campaign does a great job of creating as much variety as possible given the industrial, high-tech sci-fi setting. Not every mission takes place in giant factories or among the husk of destroyed refineries, but there is certainly less visual variation than in typical high fantasy Souls games. That aside, the mechs and bosses look incredible, with complex combat animations that never grow repetitive. Armored Core 6 might have the best sound design of any recent sci-fi title. It's incredibly precise and gives the player almost as much information as the UI. The music is likewise excellent. It's otherworldly, grounded in recognizable acoustic instruments and orchestral textures, but extended by electronics and industrial samples. And speaking of the game's UI, it's a model of clarity and simplicity. Thanks to repeatable missions, the arena, multiplayer matches, and even training segments that offer significant rewards, Armored Core 6 is full of content to explore. There are infinite ways to customize mechs, so if the combat and basic loop clicks, it's hard to imagine the game ever going into the garage for good. After all, there are many fans still actively obsessed with AC4 and 5. There are many players who will want to jump into the PvP ASAP. As with all FromSoftware games, this is an aspect of Armored Core 6 that will develop over time. Popular builds will come and go. Weapons will be nerfed, and the competitive game will be balanced. The good news is that the netcode is extremely solid and smooth. The bad news is that the PvP matchmaking mechanics feel bare bones and very old school. Armored Core 6 goes out of its way to explain itself to newcomers, and the first few hours do a good job of onboarding novices to the AC franchise. It works very hard to thread the needle between being a niche, hardcore game for devotees and a welcoming experience for Souls fans checking out the newest FromSoft game. Although it's technically brilliant and absolutely bursting with energy, Armored Core 6 also feels a bit clinical. All the pseudo-military jargon and macho posturing in the headset don't exactly humanize the story, which of course is the point. None of that's a criticism, by the way. Armored Core 6 has a strong identity and sense of its history. It rewards long-suffering AC gamers for their patience and will probably convert many new players into fans. It's proudly an Armored Core game, period. Armored Core 6 is not just fan service. It's an incredible synthesis of a respected franchise and lessons learned over 10 years of game design. For longtime players of Armored Core, the new game moves the series forward in a remarkably successful way. While it's an entirely different experience, gamers coming from Dark Souls will still recognize FromSoftware's core philosophy of challenge, persistence, and reward. Armored Core 6 is fast-paced, brutally difficult in places, and extremely satisfying to play.